Well, my friends, today on our show, we discussing comedy, and I had in mind this idea to discuss comedy for such a long time, almost 3 years. And finally, we have Mel Byron. She's public speaker, she's comedian, she's also copywriter, and after all, she's an amazing person. We had a previous conversation, and she is packed with wisdom. So she's going to teach you about comedy, and she's going to teach you about how to position yourself in a right way with your brand as well. So let's talk about this, Mel. Please introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us more about yourself.
Well, hello, Eden. Thank you very much for having me. And you've described the multiple hats that I wear in my working life, including comedy. And as you said, I also teach public speaking. There's a big crossover between those two because a lot of it's to do with confidence and being able to take the stage. And I always think of the stage as being, it can be many different things. For me, usually it is a literal stage, although some of the comedy places I play at, the stage is four beer crates with a plank of wood over the top. That's, comedy is many things in many places. And yes, I also write as well. So I'm a copywriter, but I've written some articles for a couple of magazines as well. So yeah, wearing many hats.
That sounds amazing, and I love to know more about the subjects which we're going to discuss from the perspective of comedy because, well,
Mm-hmm.
it's an unusual thing. It's difficult for people to crack the joke on purpose. And in my course, Visibility Gym, we have this exercise as an optional because so far nobody fit into. I say, crack the joke on video. Everybody failed. And it seems like a very simple task. So I admire your talent because I know it's not that easy to communicate and make people laugh on purpose. So our first discussion is all around visibility. And that's an interesting part because I know that from the marketing perspective, many people say you need to show up, you need to show this way, that way. But also, I think it's a lot about building connection because people remember how you make them feel rather than what you said. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about visibility from the perspective of comedy and from the perspective of this emotional uplifting state, which I believe you obviously deliver in your shows.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything we do in comedy is making people feel. It's about making people feel. And the great thing about comedy is if you've succeeded because you're getting the instant response. Um, and that might play in a little bit to why people are so reluctant to do it on video because it's hard to get a response even if people are there on video, because during the whole lockdown, we did a lot of Zoom gigs and it's not the same. And, you find yourself having to ask people to put their cameras on and open their mics because they might be laughing their heads off at home. But if we can't see and hear it, then we don't know if we've done a good job, if we don't know if we've made them feel what we want them to feel. So yeah, I think that's what one of the great things I love about comedy is that it's instant. Of course, sometimes it doesn't always go well, but the audience will let you know that as well. Silence. But I think one of the brave things, because we're talking about, not everybody wants to do it. It's quite a brave thing to do. I think the bravest thing that comedians do, and this really ties into visibility, is what we call either new material or work in progress shows. So, what we do is we put out to an audience stuff that isn't ready, that isn't finished, and they may or may not like it. But the only way to know is to do it in front of an audience. That to me is where the real bravery comes in. If you're doing your tried and tested, polished gold that you've been doing for years, it's kind of like, you just turn up and do it. But with the new material, with the work in progress shows, and you're doing a full hour show in Edinburgh, you have to do work in progress. Otherwise, you've no idea whether it's going to work or not. And that I think ties to the visibility because I think for comedians, You're either visible or you're invisible. There's kind of no in between. The only way to be visible is to do what you do, and that means showing up literally at gigs, which might be material nights where you may not do very well, or you may do brilliantly. Work in progress shows, going to the fringes, doing gigs that you may not get paid for, but they're open mic gigs, but it's like a practice gig. And I do that. If I look and see, my diary's not as full as I'd like it to be, and there's a gap between gigs, I think, where can I go just to keep the rhythm, just to keep that rhythm going in my own mind, also to keep visible, because apart from anything else, you never know who's in the room. And that's true of anything, isn't it? You don't know who's in the room. I've got work out of turning up as a work in progress or a new material night, or just a small open mic. I've got work out of that because somebody in the room said, oh, by the way, could you come and do this? So you don't know who's in the room. So that's a really great thing, that you don't know, you're there, you're visible, but you've no idea what it could lead to. It might lead to nothing, but it could lead to something.
Speaking about that, we had a lovely discussion, I think, about the audiences, and you gave a very clear understanding of who your audience is and why you're not going to talk to students or something like that. And that was really interesting, because for many entrepreneurs, they're like, I serve to everybody, blah blah, and you are absolutely visible person. Your job is like visibility itself, I would say. As you say, you just have to be visible, but you don't cater to everybody. As you said, this response in the audience, that maybe you will get some gigs, maybe you will be promoted, is related to who is listening. So tell us more about this. Especially, I love the thing, like a little bit about your story. I would like you to start with that you wanted to be a comedian in a very early stage, and you believed that you probably will be way more known right now if you would start when you were 18, and how you're doing it in your age right now, how that make the difference for the audience, I think is brilliant too. Please
Yeah,
tell us
and,
more
and
about
I
that.
think it's a really interesting point, because as you say, I started doing comedy in my 20s, in the 90s, and then I got seduced by a job with a regular salary and all the rest of it. And so I never really built up to a point where I was making a career out of comedy, hardly at all. But here I was offered this stable, lovely job. And so obviously I was going to focus on that. And I could have continued to do comedy at night, but I didn't have the headspace. So I gave it up. Fast forward a number of years, and I'm middle-aged now, and I think, what am I going to do with my life once I've given up the regular job? And I knew that one of the things I wanted to go back to was comedy, and that came about because I'd had some difficult times at work, which made me give up my job. And I thought, what could I do to actually help people in the same position as me? So I wrote a 1 hour show for the Edinburgh Fringe about how the modern workplace is messing with our minds. And so I did that. But before I did it, I went and did a comedy course just to make sure I still had whatever it was that was there in the 90s. So I did that. And then I started gigging as well, plus preparing the show and taking it to Edinburgh. But I realized, that in those intervening years, a lot had changed. A lot has changed in the comedy landscape. That's 100% sure. There are way more people doing it now. Also, I've changed because I've grown, 20 something years older. And, I've never been a very hip person. And I remember a friend saying to me back in the 90s when I was in my 20s, he said to me, can you relate to the audience though? Because you listen to Radio 2. Now, back when I was in my 20s, listening to Radio 2 if you were 25 was a bit strange. Now, of course, fast forward all these years, I feel too old sometimes to be listening to Radio 2. so that's changed. And the audience is the age that I was back when I was first doing it. And so now I have to think about how I approach the audience. My sweet spot, and people ask for me, sometimes book me especially, is if they know they've got a bunch of people in the room, or the majority of the room is going to be over 40. They know that's my sweet spot, and that we can have a bit of back and forth and a bit of banter that's relative to them. If you booked me for a student gig, I'd probably turn it down. But often, I walk into a room and there's a mixed audience or there's a lot of young people. So then I, in my mind, have to adapt myself to them. So the relatable material that I would do for ladies of my age, that I do for ladies in their 50s, I now have to turn around and actually, comedy is a lot about punching down, about
Yeah,
somebody being lesser or higher status. So what I do often is
exactly.
I turn it around on myself and go, hey, look at me, poor me, my age. I have to live in your world. And these are the things I have to deal with. So if I'm talking about hot flushes to a bunch of women my age and menopause, they get it. We all laugh because we relate to it. If I'm doing it to a bunch of women in their 20s, I'm saying, listen to me, this is wisdom. And of course, I'm winking as I say it metaphorically because it's a joke. You listen to me, I'll tell you what it's like being my age. And I also do perhaps a little bit of showing off. So I do a gag about, oh, it's awful being me because I don't have a mortgage anymore. They don't have mortgages either because they can't afford. Do you know what I mean? So you adapt what you've got to fit the audience, but everybody has I think most comedians have an audience that they actually relate to more easily. Of course there are comedians. There are the huge comedians that fill stadiums and so on,
Hmm.
and who have a much wider reach. But they have, and I would admit they have a wider reach than I do. But yeah, so that's for me. Yeah, who your audience is, knowing who they are. And I think I might have mentioned to you, I made a bit of a mistake in Edinburgh with my publicity for the show because I missed out stupidly in all on the posters and everything. I didn't write that I was middle aged. If I had just put the word middle aged in, I would have got a different audience. And so sometimes there was a disconnect between me and the audience. There were some days that I thought, oh, you won't understand any of my references because this was a show. This was a constructed show. And then I did the Watford Fringe a couple of weeks ago, and I actually on the little poster I added the word middle aged. It was very easy to do, and it went so well because that was 100% my tribe. Two
Hmm.
much younger women in the audience, but I had some fun with them, saying, "I hope you're taking notes." Da, 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 da. So yeah, it's about awareness of who your audience is and what they need, and sometimes it might mean saying no.
So I now have tons of questions. I mean, so first of all, it's like you say that there are comedians who get in the stadiums, and there are people who like working with much smaller audiences. And let's say, when I give examples for my students, I actually give examples of British comedians way more than American comedians, for example, because I found that British comedians have more witty sense of humor and things like this, with which I can resonate with. But I noticed that there are like niches where they're working with. Like, I'll not name anyone, but the point is like some are speaking specifically for women and about female issues and things like that. And some jokes are like totally family oriented, you know, and some jokes are like, yeah, different
Yeah,
format,
yeah.
right? So not everybody will resonate with that. I also can say, like, the age thing, like reference, that's so important because I may be like, dancing with the music from 90s and enjoy it and feel myself young and look like an old lady for majority of the young population. So yeah, that's understandable. So the thing is, how much you have to give up of your own personality or your own interest when you try to play for the bigger tribe, and will you even go for the bigger tribe, like more generic audience, or it's better to work with much more narrow audience? How does it feel for you?
I mean, for me, I'm happy to know that I fit in a very particular place. For me, that's very helpful because it gives me a place to be. I'm not chasing, I know younger comedians who are coming through who probably will be on the telly in the next couple of years, and that's their goal. That's what they want. They want that level of exposure. I don't really want that. I want to do it to the point where I'm still enjoying it, not where I'm hustling and chasing down. And to be honest, I'm realistic for my age. My That's not what anybody is looking for on the telly or whatever. They're not looking for somebody who's going to talk about menopause and so on, unless you're Jenny Eclair, who was already famous in her 20s and has just adapted her material as she's aged. And that's an interesting thing as well. People talk about what is going on in their lives, and that changes at different stages of your life. So you could look at somebody like Jenny Eclair, who, you know, plays to theatres that are full of middle-aged women talking about topics that are interesting to me. But she has been doing that all her working life. She's been talking about the topics interesting to her at that point in her life. So obviously she became famous in that period during the 90s when there weren't that many women comedians around.
Right.
There really weren't. That's been one of the really good things, is that there are way more women comedians around. But back in the day, there was Victoria Wood, who was enormous. There was Jo Brand. And then later you had coming through people like Jenny Eclair and Linda Smith. So there were very, very few women comedians. Now, people would say probably some of the best people, people like Sarah Pascoe and so on, are the female comedians. I try not to say female, or we're just comedians. We're all trying to do our thing, and we're all fitting into different niches. I'm happy not to be chasing down that whole, I've got to be famous. I go to the Edinburgh Fringe for a whole host of reasons, and it's not necessarily to be spotted. If that happens one day, that would be lovely, but really I'm not putting myself in the right places for that to happen. But at the Edinburgh Fringe, for example, I did 2 shows. I did my own show, the one where I forgot to put the word middle-aged in. And then I did another show, which was a group of comedians. Every day I brought together a different group of comedians over 40. What was really interesting was we sold out that show every single day. The room we had was too small, and we should have got a bigger one, because we were turning people away every single day. So there was an audience. Once it was clear what it was, we are a bunch of comedians over the age of 40. That's really all I said. Exactly. Every day we had more people than we could deal with.
That came up with like very important message. First of all, choose your audience right 100% and deliver the message to the right audience. Then the big elephant in the room, which I heard from many women here in the UK, they say that they feel excluded when they are after 40. So one of my friends, she is a director and she was in a festival. Everybody were younger than her in the room, and all the references, all the questions, etc., were related to women before 30. So she and her friend, they felt excluded, and she's like, there was some trivia or something, they couldn't answer any questions because they didn't even know that musicians. So that's a big elephant in the room, because when I hear that agencies hiring more and more younger people, they're like, we need more young people. And like, wait a minute, these people didn't die yet. They're still here. It's okay. You can get it to them as well, but it just doesn't happen. So it's a big thing, which I think eventually we will have to deal with. Because after all, people after 40 also can pay for their accommodation, as you said about bondage. So unlike that younger people. So big questions who we need to get our message. So speaking about their authenticity, I want to ask this thing in a little bit different angle, because we know this idea about a comedian or a jester, I would say, because it's an idea of, like, the ancient time. You had a jester, a person who can say anything in front of the king and not be killed. So it's like an image in the history, in the stories, in the literature and things like this. And sometimes jesters were the best advisors for the king. So this is like an idea of who we dealing with, because it's always on the verge of, like, almost appropriate. So something like this, comedian many times can say more. And I know it because I grew up in Soviet Union, and many comedians could say something which was read between the lines, which officially people couldn't speak about. So it's like the value of true authentic comedy is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking about that, authenticity. Uh, Two questions. Question number one, the importance of authentic message in your story, in your when you craft your material, how important it is. And the second question is rather about what would you avoid when you're crafting your message. Would you avoid something, like would you be afraid to say something, like if it is political and you would say, yeah, I'm delivering some, like, middle level sayings, I'm not jumping in that like dangerous topics, it's all safe and things like that. So tell me more about that.
Well, I think it's a very good point, because I think there are people who say everything comedy should be able to address every topic. And there are people going, no, there are restrictions. And I would say I lean a little bit more towards I'm not sure everything is as a topic for comedy, but it depends who's telling the story, because you can only tell the story from your point of view. You can't tell somebody else's story. So if a man in his 20s stood up and started talking about, oh, middle-aged women, blah, 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 menopause, I would be like, no, not your story to tell. And I came across this once ages ago at an open mic night. There was a young guy, and he started talking about, and he admitted, I chatted to him afterwards, he said, well, I'm only 20, I've got a time to learn. I thought, well, I hope you do. He started talking about, oh, women when they're really crabby, it's because they're having their period. And I was like, no, you cannot tell this story. And then later he started telling me about how, as a young black man, he was arrested once by the police, because this unfortunately is something that happens to young black men. They're statistically more likely to be arrested and so on. And I said, that is the story you should be telling. I can't get up and talk about that, but I can talk about my womb. You can't talk about my womb. And so I think it depends who's telling the story and from what point of view. Frankie Boyle, for example, he takes things right to the edge. He really does. But he's also very clever with it. But I think a good example, I think, was this whole business. I don't know if you remember this, when Jimmy Carr told the joke about the Roma people in the concentration camps, and people went, oh, it's terrible. And yes, it was. And the reason why it was terrible was because it wasn't his story. He had no connection with the Roma people. He knew what he was doing when he told that joke. He knew that it would get attention, but for all the wrong reasons. That's my opinion. Not every comedian will agree with me on this, but I think if it's not your story, leave it alone. If you haven't got a point of view that connects you and the audience together with that story, but particularly you don't tell it. So he doesn't come from the Roma community. Leave him alone. Unless there's a story about your connection with the Roma community, shut up and talk about something else. Talk about your middle class life, whatever, So I think this idea that everything is open to everybody, I think, is a little bit is false. I think it's false. I think you should be telling stories you relate to. That you, of course, I always say and I do this in public speaking training as well, take a view, take an opinion, because it's your opinion that actually makes people laugh. It's your afterthought. It's not the situation that you're describing. It's your opinion. But it has to be an opinion that's informed by some level of experience, and having read something in a book might be experienced, but as long as it's something that connects you with it. So don't tell somebody else's story, basically.
Exactly. It's absolutely resonating. Like in my one-to-one coaching program, I teach people how to build a story for their personal brand. And I tell them that not every single story in your life will be your brand story. We have plenty of stories, but something which will resonate with your audience, something which will click, something where you can relate to. material. Somewhere when you speak from your scars, not from your wounds, so you don't have that offense, you already have a wisdom. So totally work. I mean, I can relate to every word you say. It is absolutely true, because people need to speak from their story, from their experience, because there are emotions involved in that, because they speak with that energy which is connected to that. It's so powerful. So,
and it's emotional connection that
mhm,
we're aiming for. It's
true.
emotional connection, and you know, again, in
Mhm.
this, just to relate that back to speaker training, you know, I talk to people about, you want to make impact, also you want to inform people, but if you only informed people about things, you wouldn't actually need personally to be there. You could just send them an email or a brochure. You know, the point is you want to connect, and the only way we can connect is by being there, by being present, and having something relatable that connects with emotions. It's about emotions.
So, moving forward to the most important part, which is tips and suggestions from professional comedian, because I really want to know a few things apart of the tips which you prepared. So, the question number one, and I think it's super important for people when they need to perform, and especially in comedy, you need to come up in that uplifted energy and things like that. And I'm not talking about the fear of the stage, it's a completely different topic. I'm talking about the situations when we were depressed all morning and things like this, and we have show in the evening, and it can be completely different story. I mean, depression is not somebody's fault. It can be any kind of life circumstances. So, how you prepare yourself to be in a right mood for the comedy?
And first of all, I would say that for a lot of comics, actually, the act of performing is something that lifts them up. You can feel really rubbish, but go out there and really give a performance. The famous British comedian Bob Monkhouse, who used to talk about doctor theatre, and that, you know, being on stage can help you to heal, even if you're just in that 20 minutes when you're on stage. But it's not always the case. If you're feeling a bit gloomy, well, you know, then yeah, it's hard. It's hard. The thing I find, what I call it, and I call it zoning, which is getting into the zone. And this is different things for different people. This is not about rehearsing your material. At some point, you stop doing that. What you're trying to do is to get into flow by giving yourself some good messages, getting the adrenaline, all the positive stuff flowing, you know, the good stuff flowing through your brain and through your body. And for me, it's music. Just before listening to the right kind of music, you know, it's music I wouldn't necessarily listen to in other circumstances, but headphones on, boom, boom, boom. It's maybe watching something before you go out. As you might see from behind me, I'm a huge fan of old movies. I've got posters behind me. So maybe just before I go out to a gig, I might watch an old movie or something if there's time. It's about getting yourself in the right mood, taking yourself away from where you're feeling, which is not the same as I must know my material really well. Whether when you're in flow, when you're in that zone, you'll remember your material. You'll also be better equipped to come away from your material if you need to address something in the room, to have a little bit of banter with the audience. If you're not in the zone, that just doesn't happen. So you need to take time for yourself, to not worry about what's going to happen on stage, but to get yourself in the best possible frame of mind so that whatever happens on stage will be great because you're in the right frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Second question, based on that, when we talk about that right set of mind and things like that, for example, you're on a stage and the audience doesn't react the way you want. What are your tips to get their engagement, get their laughter? What do you do? If you already have your prepared material or presentation, let's say in business, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you see that, audience doesn't react. What are your quick tips to fix it?
And often it can be just to address the audience, to ask them a question, to throw something out to them, to get them to make some noise sometimes. Sometimes an audience is a beast, and sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes, especially in comedy, you can't win them back. I think in speaking, you can win them back because you're not necessarily asking for a very specific reaction. We're asking for a very specific reaction. We're asking them to laugh. But in order for them to do that, we have to give them something to laugh at. But what can happen, and I've seen this happen a lot, is there could be just two, three, four people in the audience, especially if it's a small room where everybody can see each other, who dictate the mood of the room because they want to be the center of attention. So they're chipping in all the time, or they're not enjoying it, so they're not laughing, and that's bringing the mood down. And you need to address it, but it's very hard to address it for comedians. That's where the role of a good host comes in. A good MC should see that before they bring on any of the comedians. A good way to deal with that is for the MC, and that's a very specific role. To actually, they should be scanning the room for signs of trouble, or who's dictating the mood in the room, and if people are being noisy, actually the MC can actually say, "Now listen, can you shut up?" So the comedians can too, but they shouldn't have to. But I've seen comedians do it. We've all had to do it. I had to do it once. This woman, she was just the whole mood of the front row, and also she was right in my sight line. She was wearing headphones like you are now and clearly listening to something. So I very gently had to tell her in a funny way that she'd have much better time if she took the headphones out, and that made the rest of the audience laugh. And I think she felt a little bit she felt humiliated, but at the same time, which was not what I would ever want to do to somebody. But hang on, the contract is you've come in to hear me perform. It's a contract. You've come to hear me perform. I'm fulfilling my part of the contract. You need to fulfill your part. Mm-hmm. If you don't enjoy it, I can't really control that, but you at least have to listen.
Well, that's a fantastic message, that you need to fulfill your part of contract, because that's the same thing when we present something in business.
Absolutely.
My God, that's a good thing in terms of the, self-esteem thing, because I know that many small businesses, they so underestimate themselves when they present their business. They don't even consider that there is a contract on both sides to listen to this presentation, as long as the deal is like that, to present something and to be heard.
As long as you're in the room, that's the deal. And by and large, the contract works because the audience has something that I can give them. They want something, I've got it. Sometimes they may not like what it is I have on offer. That's obviously, that happens. It's unfortunate. But the contract is, I've got something you need. Let's just give it away. If you don't like my comedy, I'll be gone in a maximum of 20 minutes. So just let me get on with it. Don't interrupt anybody else who is enjoying it. And then I'll be gone. And then maybe somebody else will come on that you're really enjoying. So yeah, I think there has to be give and take on both parts. Although I do understand, if you paid for a ticket, there is that expectation that everybody will be entertaining. But comedy is so much taste, isn't it? Any entertainment.
It's a lot of thinking. I mean, I don't consider comedy, probably that's because of my choice of comedians who I listen, because, for example, I like Trevor Noah, and I love what he says, and I love his message and things like that, but many times he's wrong. So I just skip that part because I'm watching him on YouTube, but still we choose what to watch and things like that. Obviously, if I would go for some primitive type of comedy, like, below the belt type of jokes, probably I wouldn't enjoy it. Things like that. So I wouldn't buy a ticket for that type of show, right?
It's totally a question of taste. And
Absolutely.
so, we get reviewers come to see our shows at the Edinburgh Fringe, and two reviewers can see the same show, and one could say it's absolutely brilliant, and one could say I hated it. And are they both right? Are they both wrong? Yeah, it's very much
both are in the domain. So the very practical question, because in my courses for video, I usually teach people to improvise. So I don't say that they need to memorize something, they need to know the subject. But when they speak on live video, or not that much on stage, but for live video specifically, they need to have that energy, they need to have that vibe, which is usually come with the first take. So they really need to learn how to improvise, enjoy the process and things like this, not stuck in that fear, oh my god, I forgot that line, whatever I did right. My question is to you, because you say you write your material, obviously you memorize it, so what are techniques for memorizing your content and still be refreshing and vibing in the right way?
My main thing is I never write anything down in full. I never write down every single word. Some people do. I never write down. I know what the ending is going to be, and that's the bit, because you're leading up to the punchline, you're leading up to the funny bit. But I would never write down. Some people literally type out their entire Edinburgh shows, and I can't do that. So, but what I need, what I have is notes, keywords of things that I know, of the place I'm going to be, the destination I'm getting to. That's what my keyword, my note is telling me. How I get there might differ slightly, and I might get it wrong. But you know what? At the end of the day, you didn't know what I was going to say in the first place. But the main thing is to get to that destination, to get to that punchline, to get to that message or the call to action, whatever it is, and say that correctly. So for me, it's about distilling things down into notes and keywords. And certainly if I'm rehearsing a full-length show, I will have cards with notes on them. And eventually I'll get rid of the cards. You will see if you go to a new material night or a work in progress night, people will have notes on them. Some people walk on the stage with a notebook, and that's perfectly fine. And also in comedy, of course, we have the great gift that if it all goes wrong, that could actually give us another opportunity for laughter. So I would say in a non-comedic situation, be aware that it going wrong is not the worst thing that could happen. As long as you know the destination and as long as you know the call to action, because that's, from a business point of view, the punchline, as it were, is your call to action, the thing you want. So as long as you know that's where you're going to, then I think, if it doesn't quite go to plan, it's okay. Play around with it. If you forget something, come back to it later. And I've done this myself and advised clients to do it. Come back to it and go, oh, and listen, there's one more thing that I want you to know. It's really important. That's why I've left it till the end. It isn't. I left it till the end because I forgot. But you don't know that, So there are ways and means around it. But my view is never, ever, ever rehearse every single word of what you're going to say perfectly and try to replicate that every single time. That's because that's how I structure my comedy. For a one-liner comic who just does one-liner gag after one-liner gag, obviously that they need the rhythm of those is they have to be perfect. But that's not my kind of comedy. So I have a lot more flexibility. I do a lot of improvisation. I'm always talking to the audience. It's something I love to do. So sometimes if the room is very dark, I'll ask them to put the lights up a bit so I can see people. Improvisation is wonderful. It's a real connector.
I love it. So please give us your best 3 tips, and I will after that ask how people can connect with you, maybe for more gigs or maybe to learn from you how to do some public speaking, because you gave a lot of fantastic recommendations here. So definitely they need to connect with you.
Thank you. So my first tip is really about creativity. It's about creation. Because I've been working on a program called Work Like a Comedian, where we can overlay the comedian's craft to the work situation. And the first tip there is about creativity, because I think we've all worked in situations, I know I certainly have, where the expectation is that we always do this the same way because we've always done it the same way. In comedy, you can't do that. You have to just let it go, and you have to try something that might not work. So with everything you try, just push the boundaries of your creativity a little bit further. You think, oh, that's funny. Oh, how can I top that? Because often you find in a joke, there's the punchline, and then there's what we call the topper, which is a punchline that comes on top of the punchline. So can you push it further? Never be afraid to just push your creativity as far out as possible, even in the expectation that probably, possibly, it won't work. It's comedy is, and I think any creative process is like panning for gold. So, you're going to get 95% sand that's going to fall through, but that, you had to get that to get your 5% gold. And that's so push, 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 get as much sand in there as possible, because in the sand is the gold.
I think you are speaking like an editor. Like a copywriter, I can say that any editor will tell you, like, write whatever you want, then cut everything.
Oh my God.
Remain.
And here's another thing. I mean, in particular, again, with comedy, because what you want is the distance between the beginning of the joke and the end to be as short as possible. But each punch, so that your gag rate is higher, so that each punchline comes quicker. Your best friend is your metaphorical scissors. Just cut, 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 cut. If this joke isn't working, it's probably because it's overloaded. And if it's overloaded with words, if there's too much exposition, just get rid of it. Get to the punchline. Cut, 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 cut. But never be afraid to put all that stuff in. But don't be afraid to cut. But that's what the creative process is. The creative process is having too much and then finding the gold within that.
Exactly.
And the other point, I would say, and again, this I always say this to my speaking clients as well, is keep it slow. You don't have to rush. You don't have to rush at all. Just keep it slow. Keep the pace going, and just breathe when you need to. Pause when you need to, because an audience, anybody who's listening to you, also needs time to take in your message. And particularly if you want them to laugh, if you go too fast where there's no time for them to laugh, they will take that as a signal unconsciously that you don't need that from them. You don't need them to laugh. And also it's an unconscious signal that you're not quite sure this joke is good enough, and you must never do that. If you have a pause, you're saying, and now you're part of the contract, you have to laugh here.
Laugh.
Yeah, it's like holding up a little laugh sign. Exactly.
Applause. Laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Woo, applause. It is. You need to take it slow. Always take it slow. It doesn't. You will never think. You think you will, but you will never sound like somebody whose batteries are running down. You think you do, but you don't. So just speak much slower than you would in normal life. Leave those pauses, get that rhythm and that pace.
This power of the pause is so underestimated in like younger speakers who just started. And personally, been guilty in that. I speak very, very I can't even say that, very, very fast. So that happened because my native language is much faster than English, first of all. And that's a problem for many people for whom English is like my third language or something like that. So it's definitely a different pace just based on your traditional language, first of all. And then what you said is just brilliant. Like when you are not sure in your message, whether it's joke or it's just a message, you'll try to skip it as fast as possible. It's basically equal to what you close your eyes. You're like,
yeah.
Like you pass it, done it, fine.
And I see people do this all the time. I see people do this in speaking and in comedy. Oh, I'm not sure that's funny, so I'll just move on. In speaking, when they get to the end, when they're doing the call to action, their body language changes, their voice changes, because they're lacking that confidence. And that's the most important bit. Everything was leading up to that bit.
Yes.
Don't fail now. This is it. This is your chance. This is your chance to get something from the audience, that feedback, whether they're going to hire you to do the job or whether they're going to laugh at you. It's all related to the same thing. That's why I think there is so much that we can learn in the world of work from how we craft our comedy. And the processes and the steps that we take, and things like, as I say, that whole creativity and the work in progress, and the pace, and having the confidence to just stop.
You just say exactly what I teach in my course, because when we come to the learning part about call to action, this is the biggest problem for any business people, because it doesn't matter if they incorporate, it doesn't matter if they have their own business. When it comes to call to action and they actually need to sell something, they can be most brilliant for whatever time they took for the presentation. And in the moment call to action happen, again, been guilty in that as well.
Me too.
Yeah, everybody, I think. We actually just shrink that part as much as it possible to whatever is running in our mind. We don't want to be salesy, we don't want to be persuasive, we don't want to appear as bad people, we
Yeah.
don't want to push anybody. So basically, we psychologically shrink in such a level that in the moment of call to action, we aim to be invisible, unheardable, not attendable, somewhere down the stage or below the
Mhm.
camera, so nobody ever noticed our call to action. And then
Yeah.
after that, we complain that, oh, nobody buying or nobody commenting. Surprise, surprise.
You didn't ask them to. You have to ask them. You have to
You not
ask
even
any
not ask, you
audience.
hide deliberately
Mhm.
in that moment. I saw so many people, they're like, I'm presenting, I'm wonderful. Even their body language is like open and wonderful. And then they sell, they're like,
Yeah, literally turning to the side. I've
and they're
seen
even
it.
not looking. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're looking
And
away.
the voice changes and everything. And it's saying, I'm not confident in this message.
Exactly.
And you have to be confident, even if you're not sure. The
Mhm.
only way to find out is to put it out there as if you are sure.
Exactly.
And you put out a joke or a message and as if, look, this is really good. You are telling people respond positive. You're sending out
I
signals and saying,
believe you have to laugh at here, and I'm going
yeah,
to hint you with
yeah,
that with my
stop now.
confidence.
Over to you. Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, this
Wow,
is what I need
that's
to do.
gold.
Mm. It's
You're so
deep, isn't
deep.
it? It's deep.
That's like I'm goosebumps. So you're so deep. You're brilliant.
And then my last tip really is to always take a view.
Mhm.
Always take a view. Your view is unique. And this is true again, whether you're presenting or whether you're telling jokes. You make it about yourself and your own personal view. Don't be afraid to have an opinion, because the opinion bit is sometimes the funny thing. And and your opinion is what makes you different, your viewpoint. So my viewpoint is coming from my age, my life experience, which is different from somebody who's 30 years younger than me. And I see comedians 30 years younger than me. They're coming from a very different viewpoint. Like your friend is, didn't understand the references. I don't understand some of the
Yeah.
things what they say. So it is, never be afraid to have that opinion, because that's what you're bringing. Only you can bring that. And your opinion will be different than somebody else's. So always take a view on something, because the view can be amusing, or the view can be something relatable, or it can connect you with the audience. But the thing that you have about you based on your experience, that is the unique thing that you bring to any on stage situation.
And that's so much about you, about your story. It's so much about your personal brand, after all. It's like
Mm-hmm.
how you increase your amount of gigs or business or something, because you are you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's that Dr. Zeus thing, isn't it? Nobody is
Hmm.
youer than you. So, be the youest you can be.
I love it. So how people can connect with you? Because
So
I
I've
know you're so brilliant. I mean, I want to connect
oh,
with you again.
bless you,
So
bless you.
right now.
I have a website, melbyron.com, that's mainly focused on my speaker coaching work. I'm very busy on LinkedIn. I believe there's only one Mel Byron on LinkedIn. That's me. And Twitter. I haven't been so busy on Twitter and Instagram, but I really need to be doing more of that, because I've got a lot of gigs. The winter is a busy season for gigs. So come and so follow me on those, but we'll put the links in. But my website is the first place to go to,
Fantastic. And
melbyron.com.
people can see all the links to all the social media on your site, right?
They're on there. They're on the website as
Excellent.
well.
So I will share your site with people and other links in the description below.
Brilliant.
And people, please connect with Mel because, as you see, she's brilliant. She
Oh, thank
absolutely
you.
packed with wisdom, and I love every tip you gave. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been such fun. It's been really good. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.